Any understanding of industrialization as a process, as a social phenomenon, is totally incomplete without understanding what did the classical sociology thinkers say about it. What was their opinion? And believe me, all three classical thinkers in sociology, the trio, a very famous triad, Durkheim, Max Weber, and Karl Marx, each of these had something very crucial to say on industrialization and how it impacted society. Now, do remember that sociology as a social science emerged in Europe. It is a relatively new field of study. Most of the European societies were grappling with a very, very uncertain and destabilizing situation. Industrial revolution was being experienced. So we are talking about the 19th century Europe, where massive and dramatic social changes were coming. Hence, all members of society were experiencing stress, anxiety, the incapacity or the incapability to keep up with this sudden wave of modernization. Now, if you remember, we had discussed in the previous session that whenever we talk about culture, all students of sociology must understand that culture is nothing but the way we eat, drink, talk, think, and dress up. It is just a way of life. The only thing is, it is shared between group members. Anything that doesn't match the culture seems very odd. It is laughed at, it is rejected, and things which follow cultural norms are the ones which look normal to us. But culture is also of two kinds. You must have read in your NCERT 11th standard book, we had also discussed it while doing that chapter, that there is a material culture and there is a non-material culture. Material culture always has components such as buildings, artifacts, things that you can see and feel, rather things that are very tangible. Our monuments, architecture, all these can be a part of material culture. Then there are certain things that come under non-material culture, and these are things that you cannot touch and see, but you can absolutely feel them. They are more abstract. For example, language. For example, feelings, values, modes, folkways, norms, these typical sociological concepts, they come under non-material culture. Values, a sense of judgment, what is right, what is wrong. Norms, the do's and don'ts and the rules of society. Folkways, the way a group of people conducts its day-to-day life. And modes, strong and strict social rules that people cannot break easily. All these come under the non-material culture, and hence it is the more behavioral aspect of society, how people behave. I had also told you there is something called culture lag, because material culture has a tendency of developing very, very fast. I mean, how long does it take? Let's take a very simple and relevant example from Indian society itself. You talk about the smart city mission that was conceived back in 2015. How long does it take for a government or for a society to change its material culture? Within a span of 2, 3, 4 years, you can see metro connections in all major cities in India. You can see good buses running with AC and built with a navigation system. You can see good schools, good hospitals coming up. You can see better facilities in terms of traffic light, more monuments, more amusement parks. I mean, it just takes very less time. Therefore, material culture develops very quickly. But for people to adapt to the material culture, it can take very, very long, sometimes even generations. And this is the lag between the two. While material culture will be super fast, the non-material culture, that is, the behavior and the acceptance from the side of people, will always take very long to come. And that's the reason this lag gets created between these two components. Now, do understand that sociology as a discipline is a product of this culture lag. It is a product of the lag between the material culture that was developing at a very fast and neck-breaking speed in Europe because of the ongoing industrial revolution. On the other hand, people and the members of society were not able to adapt so quickly to these changes because they were used to living in a very primitive, simple, and traditional society. So we can say, and this is something you may not find in most of the textbooks or sources, so therefore keep a note of this and do remember, sociology as a social science is in a big way the product of cultural lag that Europe was experiencing in the 19th century. Now, all these thinkers, the trio of Max, Durkheim, and Weber, all these were also product of the culture lag. They were unable to understand why is there so much behavioral problem going on in society. Why are we losing our traditions and values every single day? Why there are people who are committing suicide? Why are people depressed? Why is religion changing? Why is it becoming less important to our life? Why are people becoming so practical, individualistic, and materialistic? These people also, like most other common people of society, were unable to understand what is going on. It was this dilemma and this pain and confusion which gave birth to a scientific study of society. The need to understand why is so much social change happening? Why are people in distress? Why can't they catch up with the new technology and modernization? This gave birth to sociology. And therefore, let's also try to understand separately what did each of them say about industrialization and modernization. Now, there is one thread running common among all these three classical thinkers, your trio of Weber, Durkheim, and Marx. The only thing that runs common among these three is the fact that industrialization is inevitable. It has to happen. It is certain. We cannot avoid that. And if industrialization is happening, then society will change very quickly. They were experiencing that. Society will undergo a massive wave of modernization. Now, these are things these people were very sure about. They thought it is absolutely mandatory. It is absolutely inevitable because it is given. It's a proof that society is changing very fast, and hence you cannot escape from this social change which will lead to modernization. There's another thing running common among these three people, that each of these people have associated industrialization with unhappiness and social distress, misery, pain, difficulty, deprivation, suffering. So each of these have taken a very negative stand on industrialization. That is something that we must also know. But why are they different from each other and what exactly did they say is something that we should understand. Now, when industrialization was happening at such a quick pace in Europe, agrarian, agriculture, rural, simple, informal societies were very quickly getting transformed into urban and industrial societies. Hence, a new factory system came into picture. The factory system meant that now people will not work for themselves. Now, as a farmer, you will not work in your own farm. As a small handicraft manufacturer, you will not sit in your house among your family members, your children, and your relatives and create those handicrafts, which means you will have to leave your home, you will have to go out, and you will have to work with so many other colleagues, many other people in a proper formal organization. And you will have to work for someone else, the capitalist. You will have to work for the owner of the factory, who will control everything, your timing, your product, your process, and exactly how will you behave in the factory. You will have to follow a certain set of rules. And this was a very big change that was being experienced by people. To this, each of our classical theorists have reacted in a very different way. So let's begin with Durkheim. Durkheim, being the hot favorite of most sociology students, has undertaken a very clear-cut stand on industrialization. To begin with, Durkheim always believed that industrialization will lead to unhappiness among people. Now, the question is, why did he take such a negative and pessimistic outlook? Because Durkheim always believed that traditional agriculture and simple societies, it was composed of values of integration, cohesiveness, unity, loyalty, and love and care between the members. People, when they live in small villages or small settlements, they know each other completely. They also are very similar to each other, which means traditional societies are composed of homogeneity, similarity. People have the same religious values, they generally eat the same kind of food, they generally have a similar lifestyle, they do the same kind of profession, they participate in community activities, they talk in the same language, they belong to the same class, which means they experience massive similarity. Because they are all similar, unlike each other, they experience a kind of unity among themselves, which is known as mechanical solidarity. And this mechanical solidarity is nothing but a product of homogeneity. It is the solidarity of similarity. Solidarity means unity, oneness, integration, cohesion among people. And this is called mechanical solidarity, a very important characteristic of traditional simple agriculture society. Now, according to Emile Durkheim, when industrialization takes place, it automatically leads to a breakdown of mechanical solidarity. Why? Because people will go out of the village, they will get attracted, and they will go out of the village for a better lifestyle, for a better wage, for more stable employment. So where will they go? You know that industrialization is always eventually followed by urbanization. So these people will leave the village and their simple traditional society, and then they will migrate outwards. They will probably emigrate to a town or a city where there is factory, where they can actually work. Now this leads to a feeling of rising individuality. When you leave your traditional social structure and you go and live in a city where no one else is like you, where you are different, where different people from different societies, different cultures come and stay together, you feel loneliness because your mechanical solidarity is breaking down. Also, not only because you are going out of your village, but your entire village is also experiencing change. They are also consuming the product of that factory system, that industrialization. They are also buying things from the market. They are also not doing their own production, but they become consumers. What is going on? Society completely is changing from the situation of mechanical solidarity, and a very natural result is individualism. People are now becoming more individualistic. Now, according to Emile Durkheim, it is this individualism and this lack of mechanical solidarity which leads to a feeling of depression, anxiety, and suicide among members of society. Now, Durkheim had written a very famous book, it's a very famous work by him known as Suicide. Now, in this book, he clearly explains that the cause and the main reason behind people committing suicide in modern society is not any kind of sudden disease. It is only the lack of mechanical solidarity, the quick change of society, which is moving from homogeneity to loneliness, isolation, and individualism. This creates higher rate of suicide among the members. Durkheim calls this change from mechanical solidarity to individualism as anomie. Now, anomie is a French word, which in English means confusion, mess, mayhem, or anarchy, where social rules become less important in the lives of people, where people become less impacted by social regulations and norms. And it is this anomie which eventually creates a problem of suicide. That is the belief of Emile Durkheim. And to prove his point, he also gave a very valid example. He made a comparison between Catholic Christians and Protestant ones. He said that since Protestant Christianity is more focused on individualism, the rates of suicide is much higher among members of Protestant Christianity rather than or as compared to the members of traditional conservative Catholic Christianity. So Protestants commit more suicide than the Catholics. That is again something that Durkheim proved with example, only to show that when society becomes less important in your life, you become absolutely insane. You go absolutely aimless, and then you experience anomie, which will lead to you committing suicide. That's the belief of Durkheim. So therefore Durkheim said that now the society is changing because of anomie. People obviously are very depressed and unhappy. But what about this new society? What about this new society that is getting created because of industrialization? The new society which is very industrial, the new society which is very modern. What will happen here? How will the members associate with each other? So according to Durkheim, society experiences a new kind of solidarity in different stages of its development. Once it leaves behind the traditional setup and it leaves behind the mechanical solidarity associated with that, it enters a new phase of industrial modern society. In this society, members are not the same. Unlike the previous one, now do remember I spoke of homogeneity. In this society, people are experiencing heterogeneity, which means people are not same. They are not similar to each other. They do not do the same kind of job. Well, somebody is a factory worker, somebody is learning to become a scientist, somebody could now become a doctor, somebody could become a teacher, somebody could become a goldsmith, somebody could become an ironsmith, somebody could become an architect, somebody could become a construction laborer. So everyone is different here. Okay, this is not a simple village society anymore. This is a modern industrial urban society, and everyone here is doing a very different work. Now, in this modern society, since people are not like each other, they don't talk in the same language, possibly they don't even follow the same religion, they don't have the same kind of lifestyle, some can be poor, some can be rich, they do not belong to the same class. Hence, what happens? They are not like each other. They are very heterogeneous. So what kind of solidarity will they experience? Obviously, some solidarity is necessary. Otherwise, how will society work together? If there is no solidarity, if there is no feeling of belonging and there is no feeling of cohesion, then society will break down into pieces. So no matter which society you talk about, you can talk about the society of Taliban, which is highly dictatorial and tyrannical in nature. You can talk about the dictatorship that's prevalent in the North Korean culture. You can talk about the liberty and the democracy that we as Indians experience. You can talk about another form of democracy that's happening in the United States of America. So whichever society you talk about, some kind of solidarity will always exist. That's a mandatory condition. Else, society cannot stay together. So in this light, if we think, what kind of solidarity, according to Durkheim, exists in a modern heterogeneous industrial society where people are not like each other? Now this becomes a solidarity known as organic solidarity. Now everybody wonders, why is it called organic solidarity? Why did Durkheim choose this name? Couldn't he chosen another name? So he chose this for a reason. There is a huge reason behind this. It's not just a name he chose because he wanted to. There is a reason. Why? Because Durkheim wanted to explain us that just like in human body, all organs are very different from each other. The kidney is different, the pancreas are different, the liver is different, and the spleen is different. Each of these are performing radically different functions. They are not like each other. They don't look like each other. They don't do the same job also. But still, when it comes to survival, all of these are dependent on each other. They work together through integration and through interdependence. Why? Because the purpose is the body survival, human survival. And this example he took and applied to society and said that just like human body, in modern society, no individual or no group is like one another. Everyone is doing a different job, they look very different, they behave very differently, they do a different profession, but still they together cooperate with each other. Why? Because they are experiencing interdependence with each other. Because somebody here could be a teacher, as I said, somebody could be a medical professional, somebody here could be an engineer, somebody could be a business person, somebody could be an actor, somebody could become a plumber. But eventually they all need each other. Just like a doctor would need a teacher would need a doctor, they all would need a lawyer sometimes, they all could need a plumber sometimes, they all could need an engineer, they could need an architect. So each of these people need each other. That's why they need to cooperate to survive, and hence it is known as the solidarity of interdependence or organic solidarity. Now, very interestingly, Emile Durkheim was highly influenced and inspired by a famous social biologist known as Herbert Spencer. You will read about him in other chapters as well, specifically in your paper 1 in sociology. Now, Herbert Spencer being a follower and student of Charles Darwin, the guy who spoke about the theory of adaptation, survival of the fittest. Spencer being inspired by Charles Darwin said for the first time the word organic. He used the word organic to compare between societies and human body, and this was further borrowed by Emile Durkheim in explaining the concept of organic solidarity. And therefore, according to Durkheim, just as simple and traditional agrarian societies will eventually get transformed into industrial, technical, modern-day societies, people will slowly become isolated. They will experience unhappiness. They will experience a lack of belonging to the group, and hence this new solidarity of organic solidarity will develop eventually, creating a situation where we are a part of society, but then we do not experience the same level of loyalty, the same level of belonging, and the same level of integration in our culture. But for us, it is important to stay together. Why? Because now it is a heterogeneous society. And this, according to Durkheim, was the interpretation of industrialization. He experienced it and he explained it in a very social sense. So therefore, in a way, he also believed that with industrialization, societies would become less happy and less integrated with each other. Now with this, let's proceed with another thinker who also has a very important theory on industrialization. He is Max Weber. Now you know that Weber is somebody who out and out always talks about bureaucracy. He always talks about rationalization. You must have read this in paper 1. This is the time we need to apply these principles to understand industrialization of Max Weber. Now Weber again was somebody who believed, just like Durkheim, that industrialization eventually will lead to unhappiness. It will make people unhappy. Now the question is why? Because as per Max Weber, when societies start becoming industrial, when they start becoming technical and modern, people become rational. Rational? People start questioning. People become more logical. People now want to know the truth behind everything. They don't want to believe blindly in superstitions and something that is told to them. They don't want to be mindless. They want to be very questioning. They want to be very intelligent and very rational towards life. So therefore, according to Max Weber, a very normal consequence, a very natural consequence of industrialization will be rationalization. And if a normal result of industrialization is rationalization, then what is the most logical consequence of rationalization? That will be bureaucracy. Now why? Because according to Weber, when industries start getting developed, when there is factory that starts getting formed, people in a factory will not work casually. Obviously, not like they used to do in the agriculture sector when they were very traditional. Now they are living in a city, now they are living in a suburban area, they are working in factories with each other. They need a proper way of behaving with each other. They need to have a code of conduct with which they can dress up, with which they can talk and associate with their colleagues and their seniors. Now, the people who will run the factory, the capitalistic people, they are the ones who will decide this code of conduct. And if they decide this code of conduct, they need proper rules and proper hierarchy to be maintained. Obviously, the work has to be divided among people according to their talents and their abilities, even in the factory. And hence, for Weber, industrialization automatically comes with a very heavy division of labor and with a very natural specialization. Or rather, you can call this role specialization. People will do that work in which they are the best, in which they are the most capable. And all of these people will work together in the factory. And they will follow a strict hierarchy. They know who is their boss, they know whom should they report to, they know who's their colleague, they know who's their junior. This is very important because unless we don't have hierarchy and division of labor and specialization, we cannot get best results from a factory or from an industry. And therefore, a very natural consequence of industrialization is division of labor and specialization. Now, this division of labor and specialization needs a very strong, a very strict system of bureaucracy. Without a strong bureaucracy, people will not be able to get the best results. Therefore, Durkheim believes that if a natural consequence of industrialization is rationalization, then the most natural consequence of rationalization will be bureaucratization, the development of a new bureaucratic culture. And therefore, according to Weber, societies have no escape. But eventually, bureaucracy will become so important that it will rule the society. To the point that individuals will find themselves caged. Caged where? In the iron cage of bureaucracy and rationalization. So this is bureaucracy plus rationality. People will find themselves trapped in an iron cage of bureaucracy and rationality because these principles will rule the entire society. Humans cannot escape from that. And according to Weber, there are generally three conditions which lead to rationalization as societies become modern. The very first condition here being individual cost-benefit calculations. What is a cost-benefit calculation? A situation where individuals become so practical and materialistic that they only think of their own benefit and their own profit. Now, we are not living in a traditional structure where we have extreme level of love, care and attachment with all other members of society. Today, in modern society, people will become very, very practical and they will chase money for their own personal growth, for acquiring property, for having a better life. And hence, people will become very calculative about money. So the first thing that leads to rationalization or rationality is cost-benefit calculation at an individual level. The second thing which leads to this is the change of society from traditional structure to bureaucracy. Here, bureaucracy means a strict sense of hierarchy, which is dictated by proper set of rules. And the third thing which creates rationalization is demystification. What is demystification really? So demystification is a situation where individuals in the society become so modern now that they stop seeing every truth from the lens of superstition, magic and religion. Now they want to become more secularized. Now they don't want to believe that there is some religious theory or there is some superstition or there is some magic that exists behind the realities of our life. People know that it is not because of magic and superstition, it is only because of some science behind it. So it is the blend of these three things, the development of a strict bureaucratic culture, the demystification or lack of magic and superstition prevailing in people's life, and intelligent, logical, questioning attitude towards everything. Now, this also must be reminding you of the chapter on Renaissance from modern history, where in Europe, after the age of revival and Renaissance, people started questioning religion, superstition, and magic. They really wanted now a scientific and a very inquisitive outlook towards life. So you can associate this with something similar here. So according to Weber, it is these three things which will together lead to a rational, questioning, and modern society. And people will have to live under a bureaucratic culture. But eventually, this bureaucratic culture will become so strong and so dominating that it will rule the society. Individual will have no escape from that, and in general, people will now become very unhappy because now they will work and live in a life which is extremely strict, which is extremely law and rule oriented, which has so many rules and regulations to live by that people barely have any liberty and freedom. They barely have any creativity. They barely have the pleasure of art and aesthetics. And now what is happening? There is very little scope of any social change in this kind of bureaucratic culture. Life is extremely dictated by rules, and therefore we were also associated industry with some kind of mental unhappiness. So now that you know that what did really Durkheim and what did Max Weber say about it, let's come to the fountainhead of capitalism, who is no one but Karl Marx. We know that even before we begin, at the very outset, Karl Marx has always associated an industrial capitalistic culture with unhappiness. Unhappiness of the laborers, unhappiness of the people who are proletariats, who are being exploited. But the main reason is in sociology, slightly different from economics. What does he say about industrialization and its social impact? So to begin with here, we must understand that obviously even Karl Marx believed that industrialization and capitalism will make people unhappy in society. Again, the question is why? What was his logic? So his belief was that as societies now become industrial and capitalistic, workers will have to work in a factory. Now, in a factory, the problem is that workers are not doing something which would make them happy. They are doing something which is being told by somebody else. Now, the owner of the factory will decide absolutely when the workers should come for work, when they can leave, when can they have a lunch break, what uniforms they should be wearing, what work should they be doing morning to night. How much wage shall they earn? Sometimes the workers will not even know the product of their own labor. For example, in the traditional agriculture society, if there is a small manufacturer, artisan, or a handicraft maker who is doing some kind of production, then he knows or she knows what have I done. For example, if I'm making a small basket, I absolutely know that after my hard work and labor, what does the final product look like? I have a sense of satisfaction that comes with completing the labor. But here, according to Marx, in the factory system, it doesn't happen because workers are nothing but like cogs in the machine. Cog in the machine, they are nothing but mechanical parts of the industrial process. They don't even know what is the end result of their labor. For example, if all these people are working, say, in a leather bag making industry. Now, every worker here has a very specialized role to play as per Marx. Maybe somebody is only attaching the strap of the bag. Maybe somebody is only painting the bag. Maybe somebody from morning to night comes and stitches the pieces of cloth together. Maybe there is somebody else who is only packing that bag. Maybe there is somebody else who is starting the process from the very scratch, cutting the plastic or the leather into pieces. So they really don't know because every single day, like a cog in the machine, like a part of a machine, they have to do the same repetitive, mindless, and very, very frustrating job. There is no creativity, there is no change, there is no dynamism in this job. Apart from that, they don't even know what's the end product. How will that bag look like? They can't even associate with that bag. Even if they see it, they don't have a sense of attachment to that bag because they haven't done it completely. And this leads to alienation of the labor from the product. So, one consequence of industrialization for Marx is alienation of the laborer or the worker from the final product. That's one problem. Now, another problem is, and a more important problem, is alienation of the worker from his own self. Now, how can somebody become alienated from somebody's own self? Well, that happens in industrialization as per Marx. Why? Because what happens, according to Karl Marx, all human beings across the world, we experience something which is known as a sense of being. Sense of being is a process in which we understand and we relate to ourselves. How do we perceive ourselves? It is also therefore known as the feeling of self-association or self-realization. We all understand ourselves. Who are we? In terms of our gender, our likes, dislikes, our attitude, our personality, our nature, our demands, everything. This is an essential part of survival, self-realization. But according to Karl Marx, industry and capitalistic means of production, factory system, has the capacity of killing this sense of being. Why? Because now what happens, the worker is not enjoying his own identity. He doesn't decide what to do, when to do, how to do. He's only obeying the orders of somebody on the top. So eventually and slowly what happens, the worker loses a sense of self. Also according to Karl Marx, a very important way of understanding and realizing this sense of being is through doing multiple kind of activities or through doing dynamic labor. Multiple type of jobs, multiple type of activities. For example, we all enjoy talking to each other. We enjoy sometimes cooking food, walking in the garden, sometimes gardening, sometimes office job, sometimes doing some social activity, sometimes doing some hobby. And that is what gives us a sense of satisfaction and self-realization. But according to Karl Marx, in an industrial setup, the worker is not doing multiple jobs. The worker is not doing diverse, dynamic and fulfilling activities. And therefore what happens? He is losing the sense of self. Karl Marx always used to say that the best way of achieving self-realization is through doing fulfilling, satisfying job. If you love your job, if you are satisfied with your job, then you are absolutely fulfilled. You are achieving self-realization. But when your job is something that you can't associate with, when it is repetitive, when it is monotonous, when it is not exciting anymore, and you feel like mechanical from inside, then you will lose the sense of self. And this is what is the most disastrous consequence of industrialization as per Karl Marx. There is a third thing also which he says here. He says that because of being not related to the final product of the labor, because of not associating with each other as workers, because of less interaction, everyone is busy in the work, nobody is interacting as much as they used to do in the primitive society, because of lack of a fulfilling job, because of lack of diverse kind of enjoyable activities, workers experience sometimes something which is known as alienation and commodity fetishism. And again, this is a result of the loss of species being, because for Marx, the sense of being is also called species being. So the species being is getting lost. We are not able to self-realize ourselves. We are unable to do self-actualization because of lack of a fulfilling and diverse kind of job and interaction with other people. And hence we also experience commodity fetishism and self-alienation. Now, commodity fetishism is that situation where our own end product of labor, for example, the leather bag example I gave you. Here, that leather bag or the daily job that the person is doing, it becomes like a monster. It becomes like a scary force for him. Instead of getting every morning and happily looking forward to go to the factory, this person is now scared. The worker doesn't want to go. He's going very unwillingly only because he wants to earn a basic minimum wage for survival. But he's not interested at all. He's unhappy doing it. He's not enjoying a bit of it. And therefore, it is also commodity fetishism, where his own work becomes a threatening force to him. He's scared of working. So this broadly was the concept of Karl Marx in understanding industrialization. Now, when we know that each of these classical thinkers had something similar and yet something very different from each other to say and to comment on industrialization, it will give us a much better theoretical foundation to understand many other things related with industrialization. Now, just as we read these three thinkers, all of them said that traditional societies eventually are getting replaced by a factory system, resulting into obviously a modern day industrial technical society. Now, our main task as students of sociology should actually be to understand the social consequences of industrialization, which means whenever we talk about social consequences, we need to understand how has industrialization impacted the various social institutions in our life. We could talk about the marriage, kinship, family. We could absolutely talk about education system. We could talk about work culture. We could talk about relationships that people enjoy in society. We could definitely talk about religion. We could talk about law and the state. Now, these are some things that we should be studying. But given that this chapter is really very broad, we also need to understand some small facts which actually belong to economics, but then they together become a very important component of this paper. Because the questions sometimes only focus on social consequences. In that case, it is much easier to answer. Because as students of sociology, we relate more to these concepts. But the questions can sometimes also be very broad. Like without mentioning the word social consequence or social institution, they would just simply talk about the factory system and what is industrialization. And hence it becomes important to understand certain basic features of the factory system. Plus, we also need to have somewhat knowledge of how really did industrialization begin in India. Like, did it start automatically with the coming of colonial government, or was it existing even before they came? If yes, then what kind of industrialization was that? What did the Britishers do to us? Somebody says Britishers caused industrialization of India, but according to Dadabhai Naoroji, they only created the drain of Indian economy, and in fact, they led to a deindustrialization of India. So there are many conflicting views on whether Western government or the British rule created modern industry, or whether they eroded the industry. If they did, in what ways? If they eroded, how? What are the examples of that? Then, after independence, how did we begin our own journey towards industrialization? What were the problems at the very important junction during 1991 when we needed the LPG reforms? What really changed after LPG reforms? Then, what was the lost decade? The 10 years that we talk about where not much growth happened. And then eventually we will talk about today. We will talk about the new concept of Atmanirbhar Bharat. We will talk about Skill India. We will talk about the digital economy. We will talk about the knowledge economy. We will also talk about the fourth, fifth wave of globalization. What has it done in terms of data revolution, telemigration, and those kind of things, which are actually very, very interesting and based on current affairs. But before we begin all that, let us understand at a very rudimentary level what was the factory system. Why are these classical thinkers so afraid of this? Why did they always associate the factory system with some kind of human misery? So a factory system essentially only means a change in the workplace. For example, if I am an artisan and I am creating textiles, okay, and I love my profession, I really enjoy my job, it is something that is ancestral. Even my forefathers were doing it. You know that India is also rich in terms of textile and fabrics. We not only have the ikat that was borrowed from Indonesia, we also have the Ajrak fabric designing, we have the bandhani, we have the double ikat, we have the kalamkari. We are rich in the textile sector. So imagine I am an artisan, I am a textile worker who is creating traditional fabrics. Now, until I'm living in a society that's primarily agricultural, that is based on rural setup, how will I work and where will I work? Naturally, I will work within the scope of my own house. Naturally, if I'm working from within my home and I'm creating fabrics and textiles, I will not be alone. My family members will support me as well. Together, we will create a kind of small cottage industry setup in which all of us will contribute in the work. Why? Because the money, the profit that we are making is for our family eventually, right? And something similar used to happen in India also much before industrialization actually started. Before British government came, before they laid the foundation stone of railways, telegraphs, and postal services, before different European powers came and started commercializing Indian spices, indigo, and Indian cotton, we know that everybody was working in agriculture, and everybody was living in the rural community characterized by a high degree of, as per Reminder Kind, mechanical solidarity. In this kind of setup, the workplace used to be the home of the individual. Even in Indian agriculture sector, if you see, as I said, that the family itself was a unit of production because all members of the family would cooperate with one another to do the work. Women were also contributing. We never had this kind of gender bias at that time that women will not work, they will stay in the house and only men will earn the money. So this whole concept of gendered labor, according to a lot of sociologists, has also emerged only because of industrial revolution and the factory system. Much before these realities came to society, we lived in a very simple society where division of labor was totally gender blind, where home was a unit of production and home was the ultimate source of division of labor. Together, the men, women, the old and young, even children. There was no concept of child labor either because the children were not working in factory for salary. They were contributing in their own household, in the agriculture field, or maybe in the handicraft sector. For example, if you talk about even today in India, if you look at Goa, and if you talk about the making of the cashew liquor in Goa, which is known as Feni. Now, Goa is very famous for this liquor because it's created from the cashew plant. Now, the cashew fruit rather. Now, even today, by and large, although it has become very, very less competitive because of too much modernization and imports, but still as a local beverage, a local drink, families come and contribute in its manufacture. You see, it is still made in a very primitive way. It is still prepared with hand. Every process is very traditional. Something similar is true of kalamkari and bandhani and your Ajrak art. Even today, those fabrics are laid down by hand, they are printed by hand, they are dyed by hand, and not just one person, but the whole family contributes, even the children. Why? Because it's a family profession for them. It's not only about the money that they will get, it's also about a culture that's transmitted from one generation to the other. And that's the beauty of doing a fulfilling job. It is about interaction, it's about family love. And this exactly was the kind of work structure, very informal but very satisfactory. That's the kind of informal division of labor and work structure that existed before the industrial setup came in. And therefore, home or the family was the one which was creating all the goods and services in primarily across the world, everywhere in the rural area, where men and women and children were equally participative. So it was a very fulfilling culture really that we talk about. But as soon as we start developing machinery, as soon as we talk about electricity, and as soon as these sources of power started being used in production, everything changed. On the one hand, efficiency increased because obviously machine labor would be faster than the manual hand labor. That's natural. But In the name of earning more efficiency, making more money, saving time, we also lost a lot in terms of our culture and society. We also left behind the institutions of traditional joint families. We left behind gender equality. We left behind children as participants in the household job. We left behind our ancestral occupation and skill and culture. And that's something that we are paying a price for even today. So isn't it again working like a dialectic in terms of Karl Marx? That we started with a situation where everybody was earning with skill. And today again, after experiencing decades and generations of industrialization, globalization, again our government is focusing upon skill India mission. Atmanirbhar Bharat. What is going on? Again, we are focusing on vocational skills. A National Education Policy 2020 with a full-blown focus on developing traditional, ancestral vocational skills among people. Self-help group culture that we are touting today. So in a way, we are going back to the same culture. Because obviously, it increases efficiency and it does economic growth. But as a model, industrialization may not be a very sustainable thing to do. Something very similar to also what Mahatma Gandhi would say, right? That the village self-sufficient economy is the best way to go. He was very much against Nehruvian model of industrialization in the true sense. And that is something that we have seen in every society through history. That it has some benefits. But in the name of getting economic benefit, we really become deprived of our social structures. And that is the factory system of production for you. Where home as a unit of production and family as a unit of production is slowly replaced by the factory or the industry or the organization as unit of production. Why? Because now we can produce many more goods. Our volume of production is increasing. We are using machines as the source of power. We are using mechanical power. So we are doing a better turnover, but it is not possible to be done at home. And now people must leave their home and they must go somewhere. Where? To the factory, and they must do the labor there. So there is a complete segregation, if you see, of family or home as you can call it. And on the other hand, it is getting segregated from the workplace or the factory. They are not the same anymore. Now, naturally, if people need to leave home and go outside to do the work, they cannot go with the whole family. And hence comes the concept of gender division of labor. To work in the factory, some kind of training is necessary. Some soft skills are important. Even if the workers are semi-skilled, they need some basic training to operate machinery. And now this is something only men are doing, because if women start doing this, then who will take care of the household? Who will look after the children, the young babies? Naturally, a division of labor is getting created which is based on gender divide. Right? Because only the men and the able-bodied people and the young people will go and start working. So we are not only having a gender division of labor, but we are also having a segregation between the old and the young, the children and the adults, the able-bodied and physically challenged people. Because not everybody can go to the factory. And from here, the whole concept of vulnerability is beginning. You see how interesting this is. Today we say in Indian society, we have vulnerable segments. We have the people who are old, the geriatric. We have the people who are differently able, also the ones with benchmark disabilities. Of course, we have people who are the trans or the third gender people. We have children, we have women. Now, if you see very closely, the whole concept of these people becoming vulnerable is also rooted in the industrial system. Because until they were working in the home, nobody was seen differently. They were all very functional and participative. But today, for the first time, when urbanization and factory system is coming up, then what happens? Only the young men are the ones who are becoming the breadwinners. If they are economically empowered, naturally, they will also become socially empowered. So we do talk about patriarchy here much more than any other phase of society. Now, what is happening? There is a specialization of work that's needed. There is absolutely job division that's needed. Then society is also getting divided into a clear-cut class structure. A new kind of social stratification is emerging. Earlier in the village society, you know about the mechanical solidarity. By and large, some people could be slightly more rich than the others. Some people could have more cows and buffaloes or more property than the others. But broadly, they were all living a similar life, because even options were very limited. Even the rich and the poor were consuming the same vegetables, fruits, and they were wearing the same clothes. But today, with industrialization, comes a new kind of culture. This is an urban culture. It is very cosmopolitan. People from different areas and communities come together. People look at each other, they borrow, they assimilate. This is called culture assimilation. This also changes our preferences and lifestyles. Now, a new stratification system is coming up, which is called the class structure. It's very mobile. It is not a closed system, it is an open system. The more money you have, the higher class you can be. But still, a very strong kind of class structure is getting created, where the higher and the upper class will be people who are the bourgeois, as you call them. The bourgeois are the capitalists. The bourgeois are the owner of the means of production. And the lower class, the laborer class, will become the proletariat. People who are the laborers, who are the have-nots. The society kind of gets divided between the haves, those who have everything, and those who do not have, or the have-nots. And this is industrialization for you in terms of society. It is creating not just vulnerability, it's also creating gender bias. It's also for the first time creating a strong social stratification. At the same time, it is also creating a situation where religion and family as social institutions are becoming less important in the lives of individuals. Then, production absolutely is governed by the market now. It is the forces of demand and supply which will decide that who will benefit, who will not benefit. So a very, very flexible class structure is emerging that's based on the mercy of the market. Whatever the market forces will dictate, something similar shall happen. Now, talking about factory system, we must revisit Max Weber here, because as per him, as you just read here, that Max Weber believed that if a factory has come up and there is more stratification, people cannot achieve results. We cannot achieve profit and we cannot achieve efficiency unless we have a very, very hierarchical, a very, very strict system of division, a very strict system of work. This became bureaucracy. Remember what he called the iron cage of bureaucracy and rationalization? So that also is a very natural consequence of industrialization. People are living in a very impersonal market situation. And now there's one more interesting thing. Now remember, I always used to tell you that traditional family that existed before industrialization was a self-sufficient unit. Why and how, we talk about it later when we study the social impacts. But do remember, it was a self-sufficient institution. A family was an entity of its own. It never needed any help from outside. Also, it was a unit of production. Why? Because it was producing its own food. It was producing its own salary. If we are working in agriculture sector and we are producing crops, we will either eat that crop, we will produce our own food, or if we are doing commercial agriculture, we have something extra, we will sell it. So we are anyway earning our own salary. We are self-employed people. But now in the factory system, that is also changing because now you are not the master. You are not the one who is creating your own salary. You become from a producer to a consumer. That's again a very big change that happens. People are becoming from producers to consumers of goods and services, which are available in the open market. The prices of which will be decided by the market. Whether you can afford them or not will decide your class structure. So you see, everything is integrated, but things are changing very rapidly now. And you become a wage or a salary earner now. Now, another very poignant question, a very important question comes at this juncture. A lot of people actually have this doubt that whether urbanization and industrialization are twin processes. Do they happen at the same time? Or is it like one follows the other? Is it possible to have industrialization and yet to not urbanize? Well, it's very unlikely because they aren't twin processes. They don't happen simultaneously, that we should know. But at the same time, they always follow the same pattern. Like industrialization will eventually, today or tomorrow, after some time or immediately, will be followed by urbanization. Indian society, the modern day society gives us very important evidences and examples to understand this better. Let's talk about Gurugram, Gurgaon, as we call it, some people call it. Now, some years before, it was not even a proper city. It was not a town. Today, it is the home of not just some of the best corporate companies, headquarters, best of malls, best of schools, excellent healthcare, very, very modern infrastructure. Today, it is a proper, full-blown urban city. Some decades before, that was not the case. People would normally be in Delhi. Gurgaon only became a hub of industrialization. It only became like a special economic zone where factories were settling down, where new manufacturing units were coming up, where new industries were coming, new multi-corporations were settling their offices. So it was almost like a business place. It was only a commercial place. It was not an urban place. Why? Because it was only meant for people to come, do the job and go. But once industrialization kicked in and it became like an industrial hub, it started generating enough money. Slowly, slowly, the people who were working in this new business conglomerate found it very challenging to travel every day from outskirts like Delhi or other regions of the national capital territory. They found it very difficult. Then what happened? Instead of doing that much up and down, people ultimately wanted to settle down near the factory or near the office. It's easier, it's cheaper. So this is exactly how industrialization leads to urbanization. When the workers or the employees will settle down near the factory or the office, obviously their families will follow. They will bring the families. Generations of people will come and shift there. Now these people will have social needs. They will need not only healthcare but also education. They will need entertainment. They will need amusement parks. They will need specialized services. And slowly what happens? A nice new big urban settlement develops. And this always happens in the same pattern. Spatially and temporally. It always follows the direction of industrialization, to remember that. Not only Gurgaon, but there are ample examples in India. You look at Bengaluru as the capital of Karnataka. If you ask a native, they will tell you a very different story about Bengaluru. They would say that few decades before it was not as modern, not as urbanized, and it was not so mechanical like it is today. It used to be a very simple place. There were hardly any flyovers, and metro was absolutely obviously not there. It was very green. It was very, very close to nature. The temperature, the weather, and the climate conditions were like a hill station. But eventually, as soon as the IT industry took over, it became the second Silicon Valley to be followed by Hyderabad. What happened? Today, you know that there are more immigrants in Bengaluru than the number of people who are the natives, because most people migrated, rather immigrated into Bangalore along with the employees, their families, their dependents, and everyone. So today you have the best of schools and the healthcare and such a strong, massive infrastructure, the upcoming metro connection, whatnot. We have everything today. Why? Because this population has its own necessities, international schools and best of hospitals. So this is how an industry always gives birth to an urban settlement. Initially, it begins with a conglomerate, just sporadic urban settlements. Slowly, slowly, it acquires the shape of a proper city, only to become a mega city in future, because you know that there are multiple special economic zones that exist here in these mega cities. They contribute very massively to FDI. They contribute big way to economic growth, national income, and hence these are very developed places. And this is typically how industrialization will be followed by urbanization. In India, something similar happened. From a rural setup, we became an urban setup immediately after the British government started laying the factories of railways, telegraph, postal, and other trade centers. This is how in India, for the first time, family, religion, caste, traditional Gurukul education, traditional food, they were all changed under the impact of westernization, urbanization, and modernization. And this is what happens almost everywhere. So you must remember that these two processes are very, very closely linked.